So I have here book 4 of the Seka Torlak series, and I wanted to talk about writing a series. So I accidentally wrote a crime series. I started with Time Kneels Between Mountains, which was my PhD book. This was supposed to be research for the background to the book I was writing, which was Mad Dawn Winter. And then the research took over and it became a book of its own. And so in this book, Seka is in Srebrenica, a town under siege during the Bosnian War of 1992 to 1995. It's a war book, and she's investigating black market corruption. The second book in the series also kind of accidentally came about because I had this vision of Seka in Australia as a refugee, and she sees the war criminal who terrorized her at Potocari, and she investigates and discovers his identity, and it's a vigilante thriller. Will she get rid or submit him to justice? And so this one also accidentally kind of developed where I had this idea and it just naturally grew out of it. Mad Dawn Winter, which I don't have a copy of right now, but I'll put a cover next to me, was the book I started with, and it was Seka as a journalist cadet, and she's in a small town. She's investigating the cold case murder of a Vietnam vet. And that one will be published on the 1st of May. So I ended up banking these books because it took me 7 years to do my thesis. I wrote the creative parts first. So I wrote the novel and I worked on that for quite a few years. And I wrote a draft of the second book. And the third book, Dawn Winter, was a red hot mess. I wrote that book as a historical perspective where the investigator was Liam, a police detective. I wrote it as Seka being of Anglo-Celtic background, so she wasn't originally Seka, and then I changed it because that wasn't working for me. And so that book, I wrote it as, from the perspective of Azra, who I called Azra, and then I called her Dawn, and now she's Mad Dawn Winter, and is the main story. So that book was a mess. That book was, I really had to work on finding what was the story and then restructuring it. And I'm happy with it. I really love Mad Dawn Winter, but it was the messiest book to write. Which brings me to book number 4. I'm not going to give away the title at this point. I want to do a reveal. And so once I realized I was writing a series, I plotted books 4 to 6 because this is the year that I'm really throwing myself into being an indie author. I feel like up until now, I have been stumbling and accidentally figuring things out. I was publishing books that I got the rights back to. So, I had my romance books that I got the rights back to. I had my young adult series, which I was going to do as a 6-book series, but I have wrapped it up as a 3-book series because I got caught up with this and with Seka. And all of the lessons and all of the things that I've been seeing in the indie publishing world is about having a series that at least is 6 books, using Facebook advertising, using promotions to try and get reader reviews and interests and get people into the series and to create bonus content. And so that's something that I've been doing each book. Time Kneels Between Mountains. The bonus content is a short story called Zora's Story, which is from the perspective of Seka's best friend, and an essay about war criminals. And the third book, Dawn Winter, I've actually got 2 short stories that are bonus content. So Art's War and The Regrets of Ben Hayes, which is a short story that was actually published in a journal. So I'm really proud of that. And I also want to write some essays about postnatal psychosis, which is one of the threads, and about the Nashos, the Vietnam veterans who, they're now veterans, but they were the ones who served in the Vietnam War because there was conscription at that time. And so I'm sort of implementing all of these lessons and learning all of these lessons. And so I came to book 4 and I had an idea for book 4, book 5, book 6. what each of them were going to be. And I sort of jumped into writing book 4, and it didn't work. I wrote a draft and I read it and I'm like, oh, this isn't quite working. I use AI for editing and for support. So I actually used Pro Writing Aid to do a structural edit of this 4th book. And it came up with some good suggestions. And I went back and I fleshed out some things based on those suggestions. And it had one suggestion about a story that I had in there, or like a storyline that I had in there that it didn't fit in the book. And I went, you're wrong. I don't agree with you. And then I left the book for a while. I've drafted book 5 and published, these books and worked on these books. And I went back to it again. And this is the great thing about writing. It's really important to give yourself space between drafts and give yourself time to have a fresh perspective again. And so I did that. I went back to it, and I'd also been thinking about it and thinking that I didn't think the book was big enough. I felt like each of my books in the Seka Torlak series are dealing with really big issues, big stories. So the first one is the story of Srebrenica and genocide. The second one is, war criminals and justice. The third one is the NASHOs and conscription and postnatal psychosis and the effect of women in the 1970s. And so I was thinking about book 4, which I set in a private school, and I was sort of exploring corruption in the school system based on some things that I've read that were happening in late 90s, early. I didn't think that I had done a big enough story. And so I went back and I have done another revision and really restructured it and tried to sort of make it a little bit more cohesive. And so I now have to read this draft and see how it's hanging together. Have I connected all of the threads? Have I, really followed through on that story and, made it a trademark Seka story? Because that's another thing that's happening as I'm writing the series. I'm figuring out that you have a style that, as I'm writing, I have certain beats that each book has. And so I've kind of looked at this one and gone, oh, I need to follow those beats and have the structure that I've had in the previous books be echoed in this book. So that's something also that I've worked in. I already know that I'm not happy with the last chapter. I sort of got to the point with the revision where I was like, oh, I'm tired. I just want to finish this draft and just have it done. And so I do feel like I'm going to have to go back to the last chapter at a minimum and work on. But I'm curious to see when I read this book how this last restructure has worked. And it was really good going on to book 5 and writing book 5, even though I knew book 4 wasn't good and wasn't there yet, because by writing book 5 and having a much better experience, because I figured out what went wrong in book 4. So book 4, I did not plot enough. I had the idea, but I was like, I'll let the story work itself out as I write, which kind of worked previously, but it didn't work this time. So book 5, I actually did a lot more research, set in a detention center. So I did a lot of research about detention centers and had a much clearer idea of the plot. When I started, it still changed. The murderer changed, the crime changed, but I had much more clarity. And so that's what I've realized that I have to do now. I have to actually spend more time plotting the book before I start. And yes, it still changes. The storyline still changes. The characters reveal themselves. I always have the nice surprises, but I just need to have that backbone of the crime a little bit more clearly. And I've been reading a lot of crime novels. And one of the things that I've realized is I've read a lot of series out of sequence. And that's one of the things that I am setting up my crime series for, where people can read it out of sequence and can sort of read the crime book that they want. And that also makes it easier for writing because each book is sort of setting 1 year apart. And obviously some things are happening in that year, but I'm not really having much happen and just sort of picking it up. And the other thing that I'm really enjoying as I'm working on the series is the way that the world develops and the way that the characters from previous books end up following through. And so this series, I'm actually wanting to extend the world. And again, that's another thing that indie authors do. They write a series and then, end up writing a series for characters that are in that. So, for example, Fiona Tarr, the Opal Fields series that she's been writing, there's a character in there, Penny, who's the forensic inspector or whatever the word is, and she's giving her a book. And so that's also a series and writing a series featuring her. And so I'm actually looking at my series, and there are characters that I want to give them books. And so in a sense, that is keeping me a little bit focused because I don't want to have too much happening with them or have them too much in the books, because I want them to have their own storyline and their own mysteries. And the problem about, having this world, if I write anything about them that's too much, then I'm tied to that. And it gives me restrictions about doing their own stories. So I have 2 books published so far in Seka Torlak. I have been publishing them 3 months apart. So that's another thing that is the advice from indie author, sustainability in terms of having the next book up before, so that's why I'm working on book 4, so I can put it up for pre-order, so that people who read book 3 can then order book 4. And, it will be released on the 1st of August. And so I actually plotted the release schedule. So Time Needles Between Mountains was the 1st of November 2025. Just Among the Gum Trees was the 1st of February 2005. Mad Dog Winter is the 1st of May 2006. The 4th book is 1st of August 2006. 5th book will be the 1st of November 2026. And then book 5, that'll be book 5, and then book 6 will be February 2027. And so I'm doing them at a 3-month publishing schedule to try and gain that momentum, to try and get people into the series and to apply all of the lessons that I have been seeing and hearing in the indie world. So I'm hoping, I'm seeing some traction already. I have had Time Needles Between Mountains accepted for a book pump deal. Book bump? Oh my gosh, that's difficult to say. Book bump. Anyway, if you know, you know. If you don't know, Google. It's a promotion service that leads to, lots of readers. And so hopefully that will get more people into the series, and I'll continue applying for further promotions and opportunities. But this is where I'm at with the Seka Torlak series, with the lessons, with the learning. I will say that so far income has been great. I'm seeing gains in terms of what I'm doing, and I'm hoping that the more books I have and the more that I build this series and build the reader base, that I will build that income also. So thanks for joining me and listening to how I'm developing this new series. And I hope you learned something from this.